All That's Left is made possible by our Patreon supporters. To help us continue this work, please consider contributing at patreon.com/leftvoice and make sure to visit our website at leftvoice.org. Welcome to All That's Left, a podcast from Left Voice. My name is Oden, and today we are going to talk about the recent elections in Italy. So, Italy held snap elections at the end of September after the collapse of the government of Prime Minister Mario Draghi. Draghi, by the way, was also the head of the European Central Bank between 2011 and 2019, in case his name sounds extra familiar. He took power with a technocratic government in February of 2021, and it was really a top-down solution in the name of national unity to the political crisis facing Italy. Draghi's government was based on a fragile balance of a very heterogeneous coalition of parties, which ultimately fell this past July. So that brings us to the elections on September 25th, the results of which were not altogether surprising. So ultimately, the right-wing bloc surged to victory with 44% of the vote, and this bloc was led by the far-right party Fratelli d'Italia under Giorgia Meloni. This right-wing coalition also included parties led by familiar names and Italian political figures like Silvio Berlusconi and Matteo Salvini. The center-left coalition got just 26% of the vote, but what's really striking is that over a third of eligible voters stayed home and didn't vote in the elections at all. I was super excited to dig into this topic with this episode's guest, my comrade Giacomo Turci, who is an editor at Left Voice's sister publication, Voce Delle Lotte, and he is a leader of the revolutionary internationalist fraction in Italy. Giacomo discusses the results of the elections, why the right managed to win such a decisive victory, what tasks lie ahead for the left in this next period, and many other topics. We also discuss the problem with characterizing Giorgia Meloni and Fratelli d'Italia as fascist. In both this interview and in his article, which I'll link to the show notes, Giacomo brings up a really important point, which is that, to put it simply, the policies of the Draghi government and also of the center-left have paved the way for the rise of the right. The Draghi government and the center-left parties offered no alternative, no substantial change, and certainly no solutions to the crises facing Italy. Instead, these are crises that can only be solved in favor of the working class and oppressed with a fight for class independence. In other words, breaking with the dictatorship of the capitalists. I want to quote Giacomo here, who says that capitalism has led us into continuous ecological catastrophe, causing wars, impoverishment, and famine. To attack these evils at the root, we cannot aspire to humanize the system, but must aim to overthrow it. Check out the show notes for links to these articles and more. I hope you enjoy this interview. Giacomo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Oden.
So before we talk about the September 25th election, I want to learn a little bit more about the background and the context. So these elections were called because the government of Mario Draghi fell in July. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is why it took power, and then could you describe a little bit the characteristics about his government?
Yes, of course. First, you should keep in mind that Italy is a parliamentary republic, so the prime minister is not directly elected by the citizens, but must be voted by the parliament. So we elect the parliament. So a government in general can fall if it does not have enough confidence votes to pass the laws that it proposes. So last year, 2021, in January, We had a coalition government led by the Five Star Movement, which is, we could say, a right wing populist party. The prime minister was a sympathizer of that movement, not actually a party member, Giuseppe Conte. And this small liberal party, which is called Italia Viva, which used to be a part of the Democratic Party, and then they split. It is led by Matteo Renzi. He used to be prime minister between 2014 and 2016, and he was the right wing in the Democratic Party at the time. They started a crisis in the Conte government because of the debate about the funds of the Next Generation EU, which is a huge program of public debt funding after the COVID pandemic rise. And Italia Viva Matteo Renzi insisted on using something which is called ESM, European Stability Mechanism, which is a European fund for financial assistance inside the European Union. And of course, it's not like a humanitarian organization, it's something like the International Monetary Fund. So, another instrument for financial capital to control governments and their policies, basically, through public debt and these organizations. So Renzi was in favor of using the ESM. Conte was not, so it didn't pass. And Renzi withdrew his ministers and deputies from the majority. So the majority was not absolute; it was just a relative majority, and the government fell quickly. It was a good occasion not to go to elections because the legislature was not over. The natural ending would have been in 2023, actually. So they formed another coalition government. They were able to include part of the right wing parties, which were at their position at the time, namely the party of Silvio Berlusconi, Forza Italia, and a nationalist right wing party, Lega. And the agreement was centered again, around the, we could say, important European figure of Mario Draghi, who was famous, I think, not just in Europe, but internationally as the ex-chairman of the European Bank. He was, the protagonist of the policies of austerity that the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund imposed to the Greek government, led by the left-wing coalition of Syriza back in the days. So he is a sort of, a prestigious figure for the financial capital and the European bureaucracy. So this was the short story of the rise of Mario Draghi as prime minister in Italy. We said that it was a technocratic government, not just because we didn't pass through elections. So it was a coalition government without any explicit popular support, but also because a lot of the members of the new government were not coming from the majority of parties, but were these figures coming from state bureaucracy, European bureaucracy, banks, enterprises, etc. Like Mario Draghi himself, he has never been a militant in any party during his career. And well, they were able to actually carry on the policies related to these next generation EU funds, which had been approved by the previous government. The problem is that we started to say that there was a Draghi agenda, like a specific program made by Mario Draghi. It was never official. There's never have been a Mario Draghi agenda on paper, but there was a sort of consensus really related to his figure as a Bonapartist figure. So an individual trying to unite different parties and particular interests in the same politic. Actually, it has been very difficult to sustain this role. He was very good at it. I mean, he had showed some authoritarian attitudes, which were already visible when he was head of the European Central Bank. But in the end, it was promising too much to too many different groups. It was hard to sustain this equilibrium, and in the end, the Five Star Movement started a crisis because they couldn't tolerate anymore that they just had to follow basically Draghi's political lines without sufficient political debate inside the government. Soon, the right wing followed, so they couldn't go on because they didn't have a majority. So Draghi resigned, and quickly we went to elections that were held on the 25th of September. Actually, some of the parties which participated, which joined the elections, were advocating for just taking Draghi back as prime minister just after the elections. We could say that the parties not advocating this have largely won the elections, especially Fratelli d'Italia, the extreme right wing party, which got the best votes, and they were at the opposition of the Draghi government at that time.
Yeah, we published an interview with you before the election, and in the end, like you were saying, the right did win the election. And from what I saw, Meloni's party, Fratelli d'Italia, got 26% of the vote, which was the highest of any party. Matteo Salvini's Lega party got around 9%, and Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia got around 8%. And actually, I was personally kind of surprised that Silvio Berlusconi is actually still in politics and still allowed to run in elections. But anyway, I wanted to learn a little bit more about who is Fratelli d'Italia and who is their leader, Giorgia Meloni, and why do you think they won the most votes in this election?
Yes, you have to keep in mind that it was quite swift as a political electoral rise for them because they were coming from a 4.8% of votes in 2018, so just 4 years ago. Um, Fratelli d'Italia, we could say it comes from an important normalization process of the traditional right wing in Italy. You have to keep in mind that we had a sort of unification of every conservative and reactionary tendency for 20 years with the Fascist Party, which was in government in Italy between 1922 and 1943. So it was difficult actually to normalize a stable right wing in Italy. Um, they had to not to call themselves too much openly fascist after the resistance and the establishment of the republic. So their party was called the main right wing party, which was, of course, full of people coming from fascism. It was called the Italian Social Movements, the MSI in Italian, and they were always in opposition. They never came to government together with the center parties during what we call the First Republic, before the fall of the Christian democracy, the Socialist Party, and the Communist Party at the beginning of the 90s. And the right wing was able to change their names, partly reject some extremist right wings that they had internally, and so they came to be part of the center-right coalition, which we call centrodestra in Italian, together with Berlusconi and the party which now is just called Lega. It was called Lega Nord because it was a sort of pro-separatist party, which was born together with the crisis of the traditional parties. Today, it's more of a nationalist party, closer to Fratelli d'Italia. Um, but back in the days, they were centered in northern Italy. So the classic traditional right wing, during the years, they tried to recycle themselves as a more classical right wing party without claiming a fascist policy, without organizing active squads of people beating workers and all that stuff, which is classical of fascist politics. So we witnessed this process, and in the end, this party came with the name of Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, after the crisis of a previous experiment, which was the unity of all the right wing tendencies, and also some right wing centrist liberal tendencies inside a unique party, which was called Popolo della Libertà, People of Freedom. But this process failed, basically together with the failing of the last Berlusconi government in 2018. In 2011. The right wing changed their name and started this new party, Brothers of Italy, and they were able in just a decade to evolve from a marginal right wing post-fascist party to this huge right-wing nationalist Catholic party, deeply linked with other right-wing parties in Europe and also Northern America, and without being linked with uh, anti-US regimes like Russia, which is very important now. So they are the pro-NATO right wing in Italy, which, for example, Lega was not. Lega was really deeply linked with the Russian government, and they paid for that, of course, now on a electoral level, not just being the weak part of a pro-NATO government. And so this party, Fratelli d'Italia, um, could actually, being at the opposition of the Draghi government for its whole duration, it was able to recycle some of the social hate for Draghi, for the government, for the policies of the European Union, for the policy of NATO, for the austerity measures. And so they were able, we could say also they were able to exploit the crisis of the not just the bourgeois left, so the Democratic Party, but also the working class left, the radical left, which have been really weak in the last years. They were not able to exploit this social rage, and they went very bad at the elections. And so it's like that the left was no real alternative for the common working people, the unemployed, the poor people. And so a part of this social rage just came as votes for Fratelli d'Italia. And so now they have to manage this huge number of votes, but being part of an imperialist government, which is completely different from being a formal opposition that has just to criticize the government, pretending to have completely different political stances, while you just are loyal to NATO, the European Union, and the capitalist class, just as the previous government parties.
I'm really interested in what you were saying about the leftist parties and the centrist parties or the center left parties, and how they weren't able to capture the social rage and the discontent and things like that in the country. But by contrast, Fratelli d'Italia and the right wing parties could kind of capture this rage. And I'm interested in this because I don't think we can go into, all of the right wing parties in Europe, but certainly, like you were saying, this is not unique to Italy. Italy is not the only place where these more extreme parties are getting a lot of power. So I wanted to know a little bit more about, like, why do you think it wasn't possible for the more traditional parties or the center left parties to capture this social crisis and discontent in the elections? What are these parties' weaknesses right now?
Well, I could say that the center left parties in Italy are less linked to the worker movement than the US Democratic Party. They progressively lost every direct influence or hegemony on the trade unions, and it's difficult for them to keep a visible relationship even with the trade union bureaucracy. This doesn't mean that the trade unions are fighting back harshly or the bureaucracy stays openly at the opposition of the center left governments, but this means that these parties are very weak towards the working class and the poor population in general. And we went through a huge crisis of the radical left after the fall of the Italian Communist Party, which was the biggest party, the biggest communist party, of course, namely Communist Party. It was a reformist Stalinist party in all of the Western world. And this party, coming from the old Communist Party, Rifondazione Comunista, Communist Refundation, was able to resist, to this the historical development towards liberalism of the old Stalinist party in Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And they initially got like 8-9% of the votes on a national basis, which was quite good. Huh? I mean, and but they lost momentum and a lot of votes because of their politics of being the left wing of these center left governments before as a external support, and then in 2006 as a part of a center left government. And this government were actually really bad in counter reforms and cutting rights of the working people, and not really different from the right wing governments actually. So this kind of phenomena led to a major crisis of the left, and the old ideology in which the ideas of socialism, of course, quite confused, were at least really common in the population. A lot of people were generally sympathetic, at least, to socialism, and so the two big reformist workers' party, the Socialist and the Communist Party, were collecting a huge amount of votes every time at the elections. This situation completely broke during the years, and now the list which were at the left of the Democratic Party at the election were just a reformist list, formally inside the coalition of the Democratic Party, and they were able to go inside the government thanks to this coalition because they just got 3% of the votes, and so they got more seats because they were part of a coalition. And while the a sector of the radical left, always coming from from the old Stalinism culture, actually, which was formed from by Rifondazione itself and another party which is called Potere al Popolo, Power to the People. They formed a common list together with some democratic left-wing sectors, let's say, not coming from the radical left or the workers' movements, and they just got 1.5% of the votes, and you have to get at least 3% to go inside parliament now in Italy. So it was a huge crisis because uh, these political parties are not really centered on class struggle. They don't try to actually lead workers and social movements and to provide them with an anti capitalist revolutionary leadership and to unify struggles based on that concept. So, failing in going inside the parliament is a huge crisis for them. So, I mean, we are in the historical period in which it's really important to build an alternative to this long period crisis that we went through. Also, because the present alternative to the crisis of the radical left is the existence of the Democratic Party, which is a completely liberal bourgeois party, not a left wing party. Of course, we call it center left to have some differentiation between them and the right wing parties, but they are a completely pro capitalist, imperialist party. And that's the tragedy, that we don't have a strong leadership and representation of the working class, of the youth, of the women, of immigrants, the LGBT movement, etc., on a political level, uh, inside and outside the parliament.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and it's interesting how I feel like it's very applicable to a lot of these other similar parties across Europe that have kind of fallen into the same reformism over the years. And so I guess returning to the results of the election, you mentioned earlier something interesting, that there's been this effort from these right-wing parties like Fratelli d'Italia to avoid using the label fascism, to reject some of their more extreme beliefs, and instead speaking more about being like conservative, center right, and things like that. And this leads me to maybe a more theoretical topic that I wanted to ask you about, which is that here in the US at least, the bourgeois media, but also on the left, people have been using the word fascism a lot still to describe Giorgia Meloni or to describe what happened in the Italian election. So, for example, there are publications that are writing articles like fascism has returned to Italy, or Italy is flirting with fascism. So my question for you is kind of maybe a little bit complicated in the theory, but would you say that Giorgia Meloni and Fratelli d'Italia are, fascist or semi-fascist, neo-fascist, pro-fascist, post-fascist, any of these terms? And would it be accurate to say that Italy is now like under fascism again?
Well, I can start saying that we are not under fascism. We would be. It will be really clear because it will mean a level of immediate repression of the working class and the lefts, and some political economy measures that are quite different from the neoliberal consensus that even this government is going to follow. But if to expand my answer, I could say that this government, and especially Fratelli d'Italia, they are going to leave some contradiction because they rely on the conservative part of the country, the part of the country which has never become actually anti-fascist in a political and cultural sense, um, a part of the country which continuously has blamed the partisans for their violence, uh, which is crazy because the violence was the one coming from the fascist regime for 20 years, and then during the war, and they count upon the at least the sympathy, if not the direct approval of the Catholic Church, which is obviously a reactionary part of Italian society, which is stronger here because of the physical presence of the Pope in Rome, and Fratelli d'Italia is composed by people that more or less think that fascism was not that bad. Some of them actually think that the best government that modern Italy has ever had is the Mussolini government, so fascism. But as I said, this party was able to relabel itself and change their politics, because fascist politics, if you study and see what Mussolini actually did to come to power and then to shape society uh, along his ideological thoughts, it was quite different of comparing to what Meloni and her coalition said during the electoral campaign. Actually, we live, in a political European system which uh, would be living a huge political crisis if an actual fascist regime with a violent coup would take place in some countries, even small ones. But we are talking about Italy, which is the third economic power in Europe, and let's say not so minor member of NATO, not so minor member of the European Union. So it will be a sort of a crisis, because the European Union is based on a liberal consensus. I use the term liberal maybe in a different way than you do in the US, but just to be clear, we with liberal we intend um, parties and political regimes which have some democratic forms but are completely pro-capitalist, and they are completely against radical democratic positions. So it's just to be clear about the term liberal, it doesn't mean left wing in any sense. So in this kind of liberal political environment, it's already difficult to tolerate more authoritarian regimes like the Hungarian one with Viktor Orban, and a proper fascist regime would be a huge problem to deal with in the European Union and in general in the Western rich world. So maybe it could be an option for the capitalist class in the future, not just in Italy, but it's not the kind of political regime we are living under in the next months and years. But as I said, it will be contradictory, because these people actually are not anti-fascist in any sense of the word. And this is also the tragedy, not just in Italy, because this is a common problem of political understanding, I would say, at an international level, the tragedy of anti-fascism, in the sense that anti-fascism most of times is quite not related to working class politics, to working class left, anti-capitalism, revolutionary politics, the idea of struggling for socialism, etc. While it was like that when it came around in the first years against fascism, so 1 century ago, during the partisan war in Italy between 1943 and 1945, the vast majority of partisans were militants or sympathizers of the Socialist and Communist Party, especially the Communist Party. So they linked the anti fascist struggle with the struggle of winning against the whole capitalist class in Italy, which was, of course, which had been sympathetic to fascism for 20 years in our country. They wanted to just struggle for a new society, for socialism. They objectively were going against the politics of the Soviet Union of socialism in just one country. They actually struggled for socialism. So a lot of the left in the world basically lost this, tradition, this militant tradition and ideology, and so I mean, it's quite understandable that a lot of not just bourgeois but left-wing commentators are saying that this is the second rise of fascism in Italy, that Giorgia Meloni's party is just fascist, etc. Because from a democratic liberal point of view, you have to simplify things, especially when you go to elections and you have to demonize the other bourgeois coalition. So in Italy, it's quite classical that the right says that the center left is communist, and the center left say that the right is fascist. So it's quite traditional for us, and it's very confusing for debating it abroad, because we lack that theoretical, cultural, historical heritage to understand more properly and with some, good and strong definitions what is happening to the right, not just in Italy, but an European level and an international level. And so, not to say a lot about that, but we should at least say that it's really related to the struggles inside the same capitalist dominant class and its factions, and the incredible geopolitical situation that we are facing, in which even the dominant class was not so prepared to it, and they are reacting quite in a disordered way, and it's normal for them to clash violently between them, accusing themselves of position that they just don't have actually. So the right wing coalition that is going to government in Italy, of course, is a conservative and reactionary political coalition, but is something different from the rise of fascism in our country.
Yeah, thank you for that really clarifying answer. I want to move to talking a little bit about the future and what the tasks are for the Italian left and for socialists internationally, because you have spoken today about the problems with the progressive or center left parties. We've also on Left Voice talked a little bit about the problems with reformism and these so-called like workers' parties in Brazil and Chile recently. And so, I think we can agree that, the task for leftists right now is not to try to build up these reformist parties or build up these traditional parties that you've described today. And so I want to know instead a little bit more about what the tasks are going forward. So, specifically, for example, what perspective are the revolutionary internationalist fraction in Italy putting forward now following this election?
Yes, I would say first that the struggle against inflation, against war in Ukraine and its consequences, and against the imperialist rearmament policies of the Italian state and NATO must be at the center in the coming period. It seems clear to me that the key to profound change in the political situation lies in the mobilization and self organization of broad sectors of workers and the oppressed in general, with politics that have to be independent of every capitalist political wing. So, the Democratic Party first, and the decaying state of the Italian political caste, um, which stand against the rise of new left-wing independent working class parties. We think that not just on this political party building level, but in a broader level, we should fight to create a pole of class independence, which can bring together the most militant sectors of the working class with sectors of the youth, migrants, and the women's movement, for example. For this, it will be necessary to take up, the radical experience of unity of action and common programs of struggle that have taken place in recent years in Italy, in which we joined as a political group um, to uh, to have a new course of class struggle and political struggle in our country. And we should also think of international examples of anti-capitalist and class struggle politics. um, we have a strong reference to Argentinian politics, in which the radical left, the far left, was able to build a left front, the Frente de Izquierda, which is a coalition of far left parties. Among them is our Argentinian brother party, the Party of Socialist Workers, the PTS. And they were able not just to build unity of action of the far left and sectors of the working class and social movements, but also to have an important role at national elections. And recently, they got over 6% of the votes in a country in which the influence of the whole center left, coming from the Peronist tradition, is really strong, even inside the workers' movement. So, not a unique favorable situation, but a situation that can be similar to others in the world. So it's not like something exotic that cannot be an inspiration for militants of the far left, for militants of the working class and the social movements. But I think that this kind of experience could be a great example for the politics of the far left in Italy, in Europe, and other parts of the world. And especially thinking that we have a problem of a huge influence of the trade union bureaucracy in our country. So uh, we are, lucky that bourgeois parties lost a lot of their hegemony over the people. But we have to think deeply that there's another form of conservative influence over the vast percentage of the working class in our country, which is the trade union conservative bureaucracy. And so putting an anti-capitalist political alternative, not just outside the trade unions, but inside them, is a key to make a political alternative in our country emerge. So we believe that the crisis, unlike those who seek political, shortcuts in the nowadays political regime, we believe that the crisis can be solved in favor of the working class only if we fight with politics of class independence and develop vast experiences in self-organization. This is key for us. Only by breaking, the dictatorship of the bankers and capitalists, um, we can build a society that actually can have new foundations and break with the crisis, the multiple crises we are facing. And I repeat myself, self democracy and mass auto organization, workers' democracy are key to this process, because otherwise, bureaucracies inside the movement, old and new ones, will prevail and stop the movements that we are living and enjoying in this historical period. Um, they will prevail. I mean, it has always been like that in the left, in the trade unions. If you don't build an anti-capitalist revolutionary leadership, and so a revolutionary party, to make rebellion and class struggle become revolution, in the end, some bureaucracy will stop the process. And that's why we are fighting for, not just in Italy, but an international level with our international current, the Trotskyist faction.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for being here today, and yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/leftvoice.org, on Instagram at left_voice, and on Twitter at left_voice. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, and share the show with your friends, your family, coworkers, classmates, comrades, and anyone else who you want to radicalize. And finally, Left Voice is an independent, revolutionary socialist publication, which means that we completely rely on the support of our members and our sympathizers. So that we can continue to bring you more episodes of All That's Left, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/leftvoice. We're really excited about this project, and we hope that you'll join us on this journey.